God gave me this platform. I already know I'm going to win.
China did our vote. Biden and Harris would say, hey, we're here to protect the country, and resign.
Mike Lindell's a conspiracy.
But you haven't.
Just forget about the evidence. This was attacked.
MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell has apparently spent a lot of money trying to overturn the 2020 election. Because, of course, he has. How much? Well, according to Lindell himself, so obviously dubious source here, he spent about $30 million. This according to an interview he had with The Guardian. $30 million trying to overturn the election. Can you imagine what somebody like myself could do with $30 million? Holy crap. Oh, or like regular people, $30 million. But no, he apparently spent it on nonsense conspiracy theories. Now, Lindell told the outlet he'd used the money to retain approximately 70 lawyers, cyber consultants, private investigators, and others to amass evidence of voter fraud. Easiest money they ever made, that's for sure. The Minnesota businessman, who inserted himself into national politics by echoing the former president's false claim that the election was stolen from him, also spent $500,000 just last month on an Arizona lawsuit filed by two Trump-backed candidates to prevent voting machines that Lindell claims are defective from being used in the upcoming elections. So, look, whatever these people are getting paid, again, it's got to be the easiest paycheck they've ever made. It's almost like taking advantage of the guy. Almost. Because they ain't going to find nothing. They ain't going to find no evidence because it doesn't exist. But again, who cares? Because they've already got the money. Look, even the cyber ninjas had to come out and admit, all that money in Arizona, we couldn't really find anything. Looks like the election was the results were legitimate. Anyway, easy money. There's easy money in grifting the grifters, turns out. Very interesting. So now, the second thing here is talking about the machines. So now, the machines, a lot of places that were being contested by Trump supporters, they have already replaced a lot of their voting machines. For example, look, this is not a state that it was challenged in, but just to give you an example of states that are changing their voting machines, Louisiana passed a bill requiring new voting systems to produce an auditable voter-verified paper record. And the state is also in the process of selecting new voting machines. All right, that's fine. Another state that was not challenged, Texas. Texas law requires the state to phase out something called a DRE, which is basically a touch screen voting device. I remember doing a segment. I remember talking about how back in 2012, these DREs were flipping votes from Obama to Romney. And so they've had some issues, right? And I've talked about these machines. That's why I believe in, hand-counted paper ballots. And I've always believed in that. Now, the Texas law requires the states to phase those out by September 1st of 2026. Indiana, another state not challenged, and I think this is very interesting, passed a bill in January requiring jurisdictions with DREs to add voter-verified paper audit trails. Again, totally fine, right? By 2024. New Jersey has already required that since 2009. And so, look, interesting that actually there's a lot of states that are challenging this that are not replacing their voting machines. Interesting. Now, look, I think it's fine to update and replace this stuff. I think it's fine. I think we should. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And the good news is there actually has been significant progress. The Brennan Center for Justice notes that in 2014, you had 43 states that relied on machines that were just old, that were past or near the end of their expected lifespans. 14 states used at least some machines that were no longer manufactured and difficult to repair, which again could be problematic. Obviously, since that report, there's actually been significant progress towards replacing actual insecure systems. The biggest block to this, of course, is a lack of funding. So this is where it gets into the hypocrisy, right? But first, the Brennan Center estimates that the cost of replacing principal polling place equipment and equipment for assistive voting that was first fielded in 2010, because a lot of these machines have a lifespan of about 10 years, 10 to 15, would be about $350 million. Now, that is, of course, money that would go into the pockets of these big companies. The Center for Secure and Modern Elections has also estimated the full cost of replacing outdated voting machines for the next decade. So there are machines in service that are fine today, but will be outdated within the next couple of years, the next few years. The total cost to replace it, all the stuff, our election infrastructure machines, as well as scanners, $1.8 billion. Interesting. Now, of course, it's even more interesting when you find out that there's been no actual federal funding that has been allocated to administer elections or to maintain this infrastructure that supports elections. So I think that's a very, very important point. Interesting thing to point out, because here we have Republicans federally, for example, that that have not allocated funding to do this stuff. Donald Trump was in office. He spent pretty much his entire administration talking about the voter fraud, right? And then didn't allocate any money to replace any of these machines. Didn't even come up. Didn't even come up at all. And by the way, you had Republican states that were critical. Well, Georgia, for example, they could have done something. They could have allocated funding. They could have replaced their machines. They didn't do that either. And so, look, the reason that I point this out is because this is not about election security. This is not about accountability. This is not about voter integrity, right? No, this entire thing, this crusade by MyPillow is just about covering for a man-child who lost an election that he could have very well won had he not dropped the ball on COVID-19. Let's be real. We were really close to being obliterated by Biden. Had it not been for the administration's terrible COVID response. Biden's polls are underwater. He's got a 38% approval rating. A disaster. Disaster. That said, Donald Trump could not accept that he had lost. And so he cries and cries and cries about voter fraud. And again, what we've seen from voter fraud in this election in 2020, not widespread, not massive, but the times that it happened, weirdly enough, happened right-wingers had perpetrated it. Many of them voted twice for Trump or had impersonated a family member, even used a deceased family member to vote additionally for Donald Trump. The Villages, it's a host of voter fraud. It's a nest. All of that. And so, look, that's where the real fraud is. And even that, not nearly enough to swing an election. So all of this, again, is just trying to cover for losing an election. And you know, some of you point out, trying to replace the machines, or just the existence of machines themselves, well, that's taxpayer money going to private corporations. That's good for the companies, good for corporations. But there is no fraud, not widespread. And I think that's very important. But there are people like Lindell who are brainwashed by shady conservative groups, like the family. And I know it sounds bizarre, but TYT broke this story wide open about how this conservative group recruited people with money in order to push conservative politicians that would help them. But, you know, Mike Lindell was one of those people He has money, and he has dropped about $30 million just on this alone. And had given money to Donald Trump. And so I think that's really indicative of what that group is all about and what they were looking for in somebody like Lindell. Now, there's a little bit more. According to The Guardian, Lindell said he planned to underwrite similar anti-voting machine lawsuits in the next few months in many other states, including Colorado, South Dakota, Texas, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Alabama. He says, I'd like to file the lawsuits in 50 states that didn't come all this way not to succeed. We've got to get rid of them all. He said that he is spending about up to $200,000 per month to support a group he launched late last year, Cause of America, to restore trust in local elections. He'd also hired former Fox News reporter Laura Logan to produce a documentary about voting machine fraud that Lindell says will be huge. It's not going to be huge. What evidence do they have? If they had evidence, it would have been nice had they presented it at the 60-plus court hearings that the Trump team had lost during the election. If there were any evidence, it would be here. We would know about it. And believe me, I'd like to know if there were actual evidence. And I keep telling right-wingers, the Biden lost the election, Trump won. Okay, give me the evidence. I would like to know. I would love to know. Nothing. It's going to be a complete flop. Just like Dinesh D'Souza's clownery of a film. Fox News isn't even going to show it. It's a clown show. And Laura Logan, what's going to happen with Laura Logan? Well, she's just going to get a little bit richer. She's going to take that guy's money and put it in her pocket. And look, again, I'm fine with replacing the voting machines. Or even, again, going to hand-counted paper ballots. Not because of the fraud, but because a lot of these things are outdated, like most of our infrastructure in this country, as a result of, ironically, shoveling money to rich people in the form of tax cuts and subsidies. The big issue here, though, is that promoting the baseless claims about widespread fraud that didn't exist, that does real damage to our country. Real damage to our electoral process. Far more than a few faulty machines could ever do. There are people out there, as a result of this, all this propaganda, that no longer trust in our political process. Now you might think, oh good, they're just not going to vote, right? Now there are a few that, of course, that will hear all this and be like, okay, I'm checking out. It's all rigged. I'm just not gonna vote anymore. Okay, if that's, I mean, you're wrong, but okay, you're gonna do what you're gonna do. But then there's another group of people that, again, are radicalized by this right-wing media. They don't check out. They pick up their guns. That's where you run into a real problem. You had January 6th, you saw that. And unfortunately, since January 6th, nothing in this country has seemed to have changed. Meaning that this could happen again. And God forbid, they might actually be successful next time. When they use these lies to try to justify a fascist takeover of our country.